He walked into the most exclusive event of the year with his mistress on his arm, convinced he was the king of the world. He thought his wife was at home, crying in her pajamas, unaware of his betrayal. But what he didn't know was that the very floor he stood on, the champagne he drank, and the security guards watching his every move were all paid for by one person. The Diamond Gala wasn't just a party, it was a trap. And the hunter was the woman he left at home. Stay tuned, because tonight the king is about to be checkmated. The silence in the penthouse was suffocating, broken only by the sharp, rhythmic snick-snick of a lint roller moving across a tuxedo jacket. Julian Thorne stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, admiring the cut of his bespoke Brioni suit. It was midnight blue, the lapels sharp enough to cut glass. He adjusted his cufflinks, solid platinum, a gift from his business partner, and smirked at his reflection. He looked like a man who owned the city. He looked like a man who belonged at the sterling Vanderbilt Diamond Gala. Behind him, sitting on the edge of their beige Italian leather sofa, was Victoria. She looked nothing like the women Julian usually associated with power. She was wearing an oversized grey cardigan that had seen better days, her hair pulled back in a messy, loose bun held together by a cheap plastic clip. She was nursing a mug of tea, her eyes fixed on the steam rising from the ceramic. "You're sure you have to go?" Victoria asked, her voice quiet, almost raspy. She didn't look up. Julian sighed, a theatrical exhale meant to convey the immense burden of his importance. He turned around, checking his watch, a Patek Philippe he'd bought on credit 3 months ago. "Victoria, we've been over this," Julian said, his tone dripping with condescending patience. "It's a networking event, strictly business, boring honestly. Just a bunch of old investors talking about yield rates and municipal bonds. You'd hate it." "I don't mind bonds," Victoria murmured. "You wouldn't understand the nuance, Vicky," he said, walking over and patting her head as if she were a golden retriever. "It's high-level finance. Besides, look at you. You're exhausted. You've been working on those whatever they are watercolors. You need rest." Victoria finally looked up. Her eyes were a piercing shade of hazel, usually warm, but tonight they seemed flat. Unreadable. "It's the Diamond Gala, Julian. It's not just a networking event. It's the biggest charity night in New York." Julian stiffened slightly but recovered instantly. He flashed his charming, practiced smile, the one that had secured him his first $1 million loan. "Exactly. And that means sharks. I need to be in kill mode, not husband mode. I need to focus. If I bring you, I'll be worrying about whether you're bored or if your feet hurt. I'm doing this for us, babe. For the company." The company. Thorne Logistics. A company that, unbeknownst to the public, was hemorrhaging money. Julian needed a miracle tonight. He needed an investor to sign a check with 6 zeros, or the lease on this penthouse and the lease on his Ferrari would bounce next month. "Okay," Victoria said softly. She took a sip of her tea. "Have fun." "I won't," he lied smoothly. He grabbed his phone and checked a text message. It was from Sophia. "I'm downstairs, wearing the red one. Don't keep me waiting." A jolt of excitement ran through him. Sophia. Now that was a woman who fit the part. 24 years old, an aspiring model with legs that went on for days and a laugh that made other men turn their heads in envy. She was the trophy he felt he deserved. Victoria was the past, a relic from when he was a nobody struggling in grad school. Sophia was the future. "Don't wait up," Julian said, grabbing his keys. "I'll probably crash at the city apartment if it goes late. Don't want to wake you." "Goodbye, Julian," Victoria said. He didn't look back. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing the silence of the penthouse once again. The moment the latch clicked, The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The slump in Victoria's shoulders vanished. She set the mug of tea down on the coffee table with a deliberate, steady hand. She stood up, her posture straightening, growing 3 inches in height as she shed the persona of the weary housewife. She walked to the window, watching Julian's black SUV pull away from the curb, 40 floors below. "He took the bait," she said to the empty room. She reached into the pocket of her oversized cardigan and pulled out a burner phone. She dialed a single number. "Status?" she asked, her voice crisp and commanding. "He's in the car, ma'am," a deep voice replied on the other end. It was Silas, her head of security. "He's heading to the Pierre Hotel to pick up the guest." "The Mistress?" Victoria corrected, her voice devoid of emotion. "Let him." "Is the team in place at the venue?" "Yes, Mrs. Sterling. The board members are briefed. The security detail has the photos. The lighting crew is ready for the reveal." "Good." Victoria walked toward the master bedroom, untying the belt of her cardigan. "Send the car around. The Rolls, not the Bentley. I want him to know exactly who he's dealing with tonight." "Yes, ma'am. And Mrs. Sterling?" "Yes, Silas. You're going to look devastating." Victoria allowed herself a small, cold smile. She dropped the cardigan to the floor, revealing a silk slip underneath. She walked into her massive walk-in closet, bypassing the rack of sensible department store clothes Julian allowed her to buy. She pushed a hidden panel at the back of the wardrobe. It slid open, revealing a temperature-controlled vault. Inside hung a dress that cost more than Julian's entire company. "I know," she whispered. The back of the limousine smelled of expensive leather and Sophia's perfume, a heavy, floral scent that Julian found intoxicating, mostly because it smelled like trouble. Sophia was draped across the seat, sipping champagne straight from the bottle. She was wearing a custom-made crimson gown that left very little to the imagination. It was backless, with a slit running up her thigh that bordered on scandalous. "You look incredible," Julian said, running a hand over her knee. "Tonight, you're going to be the envy of every man in the room." Sophia giggled, tossing her hair back. "And you, baby? Are you going to be the king of New York?" "Working on it," Julian said, his chest swelling. "I have a meeting set up with Harrison Wells, the CEO of Wells Fargo. If I can corner him, get him to commit to the logistics merger, we're set for life. I'll buy you that villa in Tuscany." "And what about her?" Sophia asked, crinkling her nose. She never used Victoria's name. Julian waved a hand dismissively. "She thinks I'm at a boring conference. She's probably asleep by now. Victoria has zero ambition, Sophia. She's content with her little paintings and her charity walks. She doesn't understand this world. She doesn't understand us." "Good," Sophia purred, leaning in to kiss him, "because I don't want to share." The limo slowed as they approached the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Diamond Gala was being held in the Temple of Dendur wing, a space reserved for only the most elite gatherings. The scene outside was a chaotic ballet of wealth. Flashbulbs popped like lightning storms as celebrities, tech moguls and old money socialites stepped out of Phantoms and Maybachs. The red carpet was lined with velvet ropes and security guards who looked like they were recruited from special forces. Julian felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. This was where he belonged. The driver opened the door and Julian stepped out first, extending a hand to Sophia. As she emerged, the cameras flashed. Julian beamed, buttoning his jacket. He guided her toward the entrance, chin high. "Name?" the woman at the check-in desk asked. She was holding an iPad and wearing a headset. She didn't look up. "Julian Thorne," he said confidently. +1. The woman scrolled. She frowned. She scrolled again. Julian's heart skipped a beat. "Is there a problem? I'm on the VIP list. Thorn Logistics." "Ah, yes, here you are," the woman said. She looked up, and for a split second, Julian thought he saw a flicker of pity in her eyes. Or maybe it was amusement. "Mr. Thorn, and guest." "Sophia Laurent," Sophia added, striking a pose for a nearby photographer who was actually aiming at the heiress behind her. "Right, go ahead. Table 14. "Table 14, Julian frowned. "I requested table 4, near the stage." "There have been some reallocations due to the high volume of VIPs tonight," the woman said briskly. "Move along, please. You're holding up the line." Julian gritted his teeth, but ushered Sophia forward. He wasn't going to let a seating error ruin his night. He would just charm his way to a better table later. Inside, the great hall was transformed. Massive crystal chandeliers had been imported just for the night. The air smelled of white roses and money. Waiters in white gloves moved silently through the crowd with trays of caviar and vintage Dom Perignon. Sophia's eyes went wide. "Julian, look, that's Lady Gaga over there. And isn't that the Prince of Monaco?" "Act like you've been here before," Julian hissed under his breath, squeezing her arm. "We're here to work." He scanned the room, looking for his targets. He spotted Harrison Wells near the bar, talking to a group of men in tuxedos. "Grab a drink," Julian told Sophia. "Look pretty. I'm going to make our fortune." He smoothed his tie and approached the group. "Mr. Wells, Julian Thorn, Thorn Logistics. We met at the Aspen Summit last year." Harrison Wells turned. He was a man with a face like carved granite. He looked at Julian, then his eyes flicked over Julian's shoulder to where Sophia was taking a selfie with a sculpture. "Thorn," Wells said, his voice cool. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Wouldn't miss it," Julian laughed. "The Sterling Foundation does great work. Speaking of work, I was hoping we could discuss that supply chain proposal I sent over. I think—" "This is a social event, Thorn." Wells cut him off. He took a sip of his scotch. "And frankly, I'm surprised you secured an invite. I heard the vetting process was extremely strict this year, especially regarding family values." Julian blinked. "Excuse me?" "The rumors, Julian," a second man said. It was Arthur Pendergast, a real estate titan. He smirked. "Word on the street is your financials are shaky, and bringing a companion when your wife is such a lovely woman? Bold move." Julian felt sweat prickle at the back of his neck. How did they know? He had been so careful. "Victoria isn't feeling well," Julian lied quickly. "She insisted I come to represent the family." Wells stared at him for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Is that so?" Suddenly, the lights in the massive hall dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd of 500 billionaires. A spotlight hit the main stage, illuminating a podium made of glass and gold. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice boomed over the speakers. "Please take your seats. The chairwoman of the Sterling Trust would like to welcome you." Julian frowned. "Sterling Trust? I thought old man Sterling died last year." "He did," Pendergast whispered, looking toward the stage with a look of reverence. "He left everything to his only granddaughter. She's been running the show from the shadows for years. Tonight is her official public debut as the head of the family." "Granddaughter?" Julian muttered. He grabbed Sophia, who had wandered back, and pulled her toward table 14. It was in the back, near the kitchen doors. "This is ridiculous," Sophia complained, sitting down. "I can't see anything." "Shut up," Julian snapped, his eyes glued to the stage. He had a bad feeling. A very bad feeling. "And now," the announcer continued, "the woman who made tonight possible, the sole heiress to the Sterling billions, and the new CEO of Sterling Global. Please welcome Mrs. Victoria Sterling Thorn." Julian froze. The champagne glass in his hand slipped from his fingers. It hit the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces, but the sound was drowned out by the thunderous applause. From behind the velvet curtains, a figure emerged. It was Victoria. But it wasn't the Victoria in the grey cardigan. It wasn't the Victoria who made him tea and painted watercolours. This woman was a goddess. She was wearing a gown of crushed midnight blue velvet that hugged every curve, adorned with real diamonds stitched into the fabric. Around her neck sat the Star of the East, a necklace Julian had seen in magazines, worth $20 million. Her hair was cascaded in perfect Hollywood waves, and her makeup was sharp, fierce, and flawless. She walked to the podium, not with the shuffle of a tired housewife, but with the stride of a queen entering her throne room. She looked out over the crowd, her gaze sweeping the room. For a terrifying second, her eyes locked directly on table 14. She didn't smile. "Good evening," Victoria said, her voice amplified, rich and confident. "And welcome to my house." Sophia looked at the stage, then at Julian. Her mouth dropped open. "Julian," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Isn't that your wife?" Julian couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. His wife wasn't just a housewife. She was the money. She was the power. She was the sterling heiress. And he had just brought his mistress to her party. The applause finally died down, settling into a rapt silence that felt heavier than the marble pillars supporting the roof of the temple. Victoria stood at the podium, the lights catching the Star of the East necklace, sending refracted rainbows dancing across her collarbone. Julian was paralyzed. He felt as though the blood in his veins had turned to ice water. Beside him, Sophia was frantically scrolling on her phone under the table. "Oh my God," she hissed, her voice trembling. "Julian, look at Google. Victoria Sterling. She's worth $4 billion. $4 billion." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of horror and sudden, sharp calculation. "You said she was a nobody. You said she was a charity case." "I didn't know," Julian stammered, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. He loosened his tie, which suddenly felt like a noose. "She never told me. We've been married 5 years. She said her parents were teachers." "Teachers don't own the Met," Sophia snapped, shrinking back into her chair as a waiter placed a plate of truffle risotto in front of her. She looked around nervously, suddenly aware that her red dress, which felt empowering 10 minutes ago, now felt like a target. On stage, Victoria leaned into the microphone. Her voice was smooth, melodic, and terrifyingly calm. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "Tonight is about transparency. It is about seeing things clearly. Diamond, as you know, is the hardest substance on Earth. It is formed under immense pressure. It survives the heat. It survives the weight of the world pressing down on it." She paused, her eyes scanning the front row where the mayor sat, before flicking briefly, deliberately, to the back of the room. "But the most interesting thing about a diamond isn't its strength," Victoria continued, a small, wry smile playing on her lips. "It's clarity. Flaws in a diamond are called inclusions, tiny fractures, little black spots of carbon that failed to crystallize. To the naked eye, a flawed diamond can look perfect. It can sparkle, it can fool you. But under the jeweler's loupe, the cracks are undeniable." Julian felt a bead of sweat roll down his temple. She was talking about him. He knew it. Every word was a razor blade. "For the last few years I have been observing," Victoria said. "I have been looking for clarity in my own investments, both financial and personal. And tonight I am pleased to announce that the Sterling Trust is undergoing a massive restructuring. We are cutting off the dead weight. We are shedding the assets that have no value, the ones that are merely costume jewelry pretending to be gems. A ripple of polite laughter went through the crowd, assuming she was speaking in metaphors about corporate strategy. Julian didn't laugh. "I have to get out of here," Julian whispered, pushing his chair back. "Sit down," a low voice growled. Julian jumped. A massive security guard had materialized behind table 14. It wasn't just any guard. It was Silas, the man Julian thought was his building's doorman. "Silas?" Julian blinked, confused. "What are you doing here? You work the front desk at the penthouse." Silas adjusted his earpiece, his face made of stone. "I work for Mrs. Sterling. I've been her head of personal protection for 10 years. You just never asked me about my background, Mr. Thorne. Now sit down. The first course isn't finished." Julian sank back into his chair, his legs shaking. "She knows," he muttered to Sophia. "She knows everything." "Then why did she let us come?" Sophia whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "Why humiliate us like this?" "Because," Julian said, a sick realization dawning on him as he looked at his wife, the stranger on the stage. "She wants to watch us bleed." Victoria finished her speech. "Enjoy the evening. Eat, drink, and be honest. The truth has a funny way of coming out eventually." She stepped down from the podium, the crowd erupting into applause again. But instead of going to the VIP table at the front, Victoria began to walk. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. She stopped to shake hands with the governor. She kissed Harrison Wells on the cheek, and then she turned. She began walking down the center aisle, straight toward the back of the room, straight toward table 14. The walk seemed to take an eternity. The room went quiet, as guests realized the hostess was moving away from the seat of power and toward the kitchen doors. All eyes followed her. Julian couldn't look away. She was magnificent. She was terrifying. Victoria stopped at table 14. She didn't look at Sophia. She looked only at Julian. Up close, her makeup was flawless, hiding any trace of the tears she might have shed months ago when she first found out. Now, there was only steel. "Hello, Julian," she said, pleasantly. "I see you made it. And you brought a friend." Julian stood up, his napkin falling to the floor. He tried to summon his usual charm, the salesman persona that had gotten him this far, but it crumbled before her gaze. "Victoria, honey, I can explain. This isn't... I didn't know you were... rich?" Victoria finished for him. She laughed, a cold, tinkling sound. "Oh, Julian, you never asked. You were always so busy talking about yourself, about your empire, that you never once asked about my family history. You just assumed I was a struggling artist because it made you feel big. It made you feel like the provider. I am the provider," Julian snapped, a flash of his ego returning. "I pay the rent on the penthouse. I pay for the cars. I built Thorne Logistics from the ground up." The table next to them, occupied by the board of directors of Chase Bank, went silent, listening unabashedly. Victoria raised an eyebrow. She signaled to Silas, who stepped forward and handed her a thin blue folder. "Let's talk about Thorne Logistics," Victoria said, opening the folder. 3 years ago, you needed a capital injection of $2 million to stop bankruptcy. You got it from an angel investor group called Valkyrie Holdings. Remember? "Yes," Julian said, confused. "Valkyrie saved us. Great partners. Silent partners." "I am Valkyrie," Victoria said softly. Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "And last year," she continued, flipping a page, "when you wanted to expand into the Asian market, but the banks denied you, you got a high-risk loan from Argos Ventures. $5 million. I am Argos," Victoria said. "And the lease on the penthouse, it's not in your name, Julian. The company pays for it. And since the company is currently 80% leveraged by debt owned by my shell companies, technically, I pay for the penthouse. I pay for the Ferrari. I even paid for that tuxedo. She reached out and flicked the lapel of his Brioni jacket. You are wearing my money. Sophia let out a small gasp. She looked at Julian with pure disgust. The illusion of the powerful, wealthy tycoon had shattered in seconds. He wasn't a king. He was a kept man who didn't even know he was kept. Why? Julian whispered, his face pale. Why didn't you tell me? Why play this game? Because I loved you, Victoria said. And for a fleeting second, the steel in her voice cracked, revealing the pain underneath. I wanted to believe you loved me for me. Not for the sterling name. Not for the billions. I wanted a husband, not a leech. So I played the role of the supportive, simple wife. I waited for you to grow up. I waited for you to be honest. Her eyes hardened again. But then, 6 months ago, you started coming home late. You started smelling like that perfume. She glanced briefly at Sophia without turning her head. Chanel Mademoiselle, isn't it? A bit cliched, don't you think? Sophia flushed crimson. I hired a private investigator, Victoria said. I have photos, Julian. I have texts. I have the receipts for the jewelry you bought her, using the corporate credit card. The corporate card that I guarantee. She slammed the folder shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. You didn't just cheat on your wife, Julian. You embezzled from your primary investor. In the business world, we don't call that a mistake. We call that a felony. Harrison Wells, who had drifted closer to watch the spectacle, let out a low whistle. Checkmate, he muttered. Julian looked around the room. The faces of the elite weren't looking at him with respect anymore. They were looking at him like he was a stain on the carpet. He turned to Sophia, desperate for an ally. Sophia, baby, listen. Sophia stood up. She grabbed her clutch. Don't talk to me, she hissed. You're broke. You're actually broke. You promised me a villa in Tuscany, you fraud. Sophia, wait. Sit down, Miss Laurent, Victoria said sharply. I'm not finished with you. Sophia froze. She looked at Victoria, terrified. The difference in their power was palpable. Sophia was a 24-year-old model with a few thousand Instagram followers. Victoria was an institution. I didn't know, Sophia pleaded, her voice shrinking. I swear, Mrs. Sterling, he told me you were separated. He told me you were just roommates. I didn't know who you were. Ignorance is not a defense in law, nor is it in life, Victoria said coolly. But I don't blame you entirely. Julian is a very convincing liar. He convinced himself he was a businessman after all. Victoria gestured to the waiter. Champagne for the table. The cheap stuff. The waiter suppressed a smirk and hurried off. Here is the situation, Victoria said, addressing both of them. Tonight was supposed to be the night Julian secured the merger with Wells Fargo. That was your plan, right? Julian nodded dumbly. Well, Harrison, Victoria called out without looking back. Harrison Wells stepped into the circle of light. The deal is dead, Thorne, obviously. We don't do business with embezzlers, and frankly, your financials are a disaster. Without the sterling backing, which I assume is gone, your stock is worthless. It's not just gone, Victoria corrected. I'm calling in the loans. Tonight, per the contract clauses regarding gross misconduct and misappropriation of funds. I have the right to accelerate the debt repayment. She looked at Julian. You owe Valkyrie Holdings and Argos Ventures a combined total of $7 million, payable immediately. I don't have $7 million, Julian cried out. I have maybe 40,000 in the checking account. Then I'll take the assets, Victoria said calmly. I'm seizing the company. I'm seizing the penthouse contents. I'm seizing the car, and—" She looked at Sophia. "I believe that diamond bracelet you're wearing was purchased with company funds on October 14th, reference number 4492. Sophia instinctively covered her wrist. "No, it was a gift." "It's stolen property," Silas rumbled, stepping closer. "Hand it over, miss." Sophia looked at the massive guard, then at Julian, who was staring at the floor, defeated. With shaking hands, she unclasped the diamond bracelet, the one she had flaunted on Instagram just hours ago, and dropped it into Silas's outstretched palm. "And the earrings," Victoria added. Sophia sobbed as she took off the earrings. "Now," Victoria said, taking a step back. "Julian, you are free to go. You wanted to be a single man? You wanted to live the high life without the boring wife? You are free. But you leave with exactly what you brought into this marriage." She pointed to the exit. "The clothes on your back, that's it." "Victoria, please." Julian fell to his knees. It was a pathetic sight. The man in the tuxedo, begging on the floor of the Met. "Don't do this. I'm sorry. I'll change. I'll cut her off. I love you. Please don't destroy me." "I didn't destroy you, Julian," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "You destroyed us. I was the best thing that ever happened to you. I would have given you the world. I would have made you a king. All you had to do was be loyal." She turned her back on him. "Silas, escort Mr. Thorne and his guest out, and ensure the press gets a good photo of them leaving. I want the shareholders to know that leadership has changed." "Wait!" Julian screamed, as Silas hoisted him up by the arm. "You can't do this! I'm your husband!" "I'll have the divorce papers sent to your well. You don't have an address anymore," Victoria mused. "I'll have them sent to your mother's house in Jersey. I assume that's where you'll be staying." As Silas dragged a struggling Julian and a weeping Sophia toward the exit, the cameras flashed blindingly. The King of New York was being thrown out with the trash. Victoria stood alone at table 14 for a moment. She took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking slightly. It wasn't triumph she felt. It was a hollow ache. She had cut out the cancer, but the surgery still hurt. A hand touched her shoulder. It was Harrison Wells. "Are you all right, Victoria?" he asked gently. "I will be," she said, straightening her spine. "Did we secure the donation for the children's hospital?" "We did. Double the target amount. The sympathy vote, I imagine." Wells smiled sadly. "Good," Victoria said. "Then it wasn't a total waste." But the night wasn't over. Julian was desperate, and a desperate man is a dangerous man. Outside on the sidewalk, stripped of his dignity and his future, Julian watched the heavy doors of the museum close. The cool night air hit his face. Sophia was already hailing an Uber, refusing to look at him. "Sophia," he croaked. "Go to hell, Julian," she spat, slamming the car door. He stood alone on Fifth Avenue. The rage began to build in his chest. It replaced the fear. She had planned this. She had mocked him. She had ruined him. He reached into his pocket. He still had his phone. And he remembered something. The penthouse. The safe. Victoria said she was seizing the assets, but the legal team wouldn't be there until the morning. There was cash in the safe. A lot of it. And his passport. If he could get there before Silas changed the locks, he could take what he could and run. Maybe he couldn't be a king, but he wouldn't be a pauper. He ran toward the parking garage, praying his valet ticket still worked. He had one last move to make. The night air was biting, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled luxury of the museum. Julian sprinted to the parking garage, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His mind was a fractured kaleidoscope of rage and panic. She planned it. She planned it all. He reached the valet stand. The attendant, a young kid named Leo, who Julian usually tipped with a condescending pat on the back, looked at him with wide eyes. Julian snatched the keys from the hook behind the podium before Leo could protest. "Mr. Thorne, wait! The manager said—" "I don't care what the manager said," Julian roared, shoving the kid aside. He jumped into the Ferrari 488 Spider, the car he now knew his wife was paying for, and gunned the engine. The roar of the V8 was the only thing that made him feel powerful again. He tore out onto Fifth Avenue, tires screeching. He had to get to the penthouse. The safe in the master bedroom closet held $200,000 in emergency cash, a stack of gold Krugerrands, and his passport. If he could get that, he could disappear. He could go to Mexico or Brazil. He could start over. He was Julian Thorne. He could sell ice to Eskimos. He would bounce back. Traffic was light. He weaved through the yellow taxis, running 2 red lights. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was his mother, then his business partner, then an unknown number, likely a reporter. He ignored them all. He pulled up to the curb of the Sterling Heights building, leaving the Ferrari in a no-parking zone. He didn't care. He stormed into the lobby. The marble floors shone under the chandeliers. Behind the desk stood Mr. Henderson, the night concierge who had worked there for 20 years. Henderson was usually all smiles, always ready with a, "Good evening, Mr. Thorne." Tonight, Henderson didn't smile. He stepped out from behind the desk, blocking the path to the elevators. "Mr. Thorne," Henderson said, his voice grave, "I cannot allow you to go up." "Get out of my way, Henderson," Julian snarled, straightening his disheveled tuxedo. "I live here. My name is on the lease." "Actually, sir, it isn't," Henderson replied, his posture rigid. "We received a call from the owner of the building, Mrs. Sterling Thorne, 10 minutes ago. Your access fob has been deactivated. You are trespassing." "Trespassing?" Julian laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. "It's my home. My clothes are up there." "I'm afraid not, sir. I've been instructed to call the police if you attempt to access the elevators." Julian looked at the elevator bank. It was 30 feet away. He looked at Henderson, an old man in his 60s. Julian was younger, desperate, and fueled by adrenaline. "Call them," Julian spat. He shoved Henderson hard. The older man stumbled back, falling onto the plush lobby sofa. Julian didn't look back. He sprinted for the elevators. He hammered the call button, but nothing happened. "Deactivated. Damn it," he screamed, kicking the metal doors. He looked for the fire escape, the stairwell. It was 40 floors up. His legs would burn, his lungs would explode. But he had no choice. He burst through the service door and began to climb. 1 flight, 2 flights, 10. By the 20th floor, he was drenched in sweat. His Brioni suit was soaked. His chest felt like it was being crushed by a vice. But the fear of poverty, the fear of being nothing, drove him upward. 30 floors. He was dizzy. He was hallucinating Victoria's face in the shadows of the concrete stairwell, mocking him. 40 floors. He collapsed against the door to the penthouse service entrance. He gasped for air, his vision swimming. He reached into his pocket for his physical backup key, the one he kept for emergencies. His hands shook so violently he dropped it twice. Finally, he jammed the key into the lock. He prayed she hadn't changed the physical cylinders yet. It had only been an hour. The lock clicked. The door swung open. He stumbled into the kitchen. It was dark. The penthouse was silent. The panoramic view of Manhattan twinkled outside, indifferent to his ruin. "I made it," he wheezed. "I made it." He didn't turn on the lights. He navigated by the glow of the city, knocking over a vase in the hallway as he rushed toward the master bedroom. He tore open the closet door, pushing aside the silk dresses and the suits he now knew he didn't really own. He fell to his knees in front of the wall safe. Left 40. Right 12. Left 05, his birthday. The mechanism whirred. The light on the keypad turned green. Click. Julian swung the heavy steel door open. He reached inside, his fingers anticipating the cool touch of cash stacks and the heavy weight of gold coins. His hand grasped nothing but air. He frowned, fumbling in the dark. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. He shone the beam into the safe. It was empty. No cash. No gold. No passport. There was only a single, small object sitting in the center of the velvet-lined shelf. It was a playing card, the King of Hearts, and written across the face of the king in black Sharpie was one word: checkmate. No, Julian whimpered. No, no, no. He began to frantically pat down the inside of the safe, as if the money might be hiding in a secret compartment he'd missed. Looking for this? A voice spoke from the darkness of the bedroom. Julian spun around, dropping his phone. The flashlight beam spun across the floor, illuminating a pair of polished black dress shoes. Someone flicked a switch. The bedroom lights flooded on, blinding Julian. Sitting in the armchair in the corner was Silas, the head of security. Next to him sat two uniformed NYPD officers, and on the table next to them was a clear evidence bag containing Julian's cash, his gold, and his passport. You, Julian gasped. You took it. Technically, Silas said, his voice deep and rumbling like thunder. Mrs. Sterling recovered company assets. The cash in this safe was withdrawn from the Thorn Logistics Petty Cash Fund 3 months ago. The gold was purchased with a company bonus that was never authorized by the board. It's evidence, Mr. Thorn. One of the police officers stood up, his hand resting on his belt. Julian Thorn? Julian backed away until his back hit the open safe. This is a misunderstanding. I'm the husband. I have rights. We have a warrant for your arrest, Mr. Thorn, the officer said, stepping forward with handcuffs. Charges include grand larceny, corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and breaking and entering. Breaking and entering? Julian screamed. I live here. Not as of 9 p.m. tonight, the officer said calmly. Mrs. Sterling filed an emergency restraining order and evicted you. You broke into a property you are legally barred from entering. Julian looked at the handcuffs. He looked at Silas, who was watching him with zero sympathy. Where is she? Julian whispered. Does she know? Silas stood up, towering over the broken man. She's at the Gala, Mr. Thorn, finishing dessert. She told me to give you a message if you showed up. What? Julian asked, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. What's the message? Silas leaned in close. She said, I hope Sophia was worth it. The officer spun Julian around and slammed him against the closet door. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. It was the only jewelry he would be wearing for a long, long time. The night air outside the museum had been cold, but the silence inside the Sterling Heights lobby was glacial. Julian burst through the revolving doors, his tuxedo jacket torn at the shoulder, his breath coming in ragged, desperate heaves. He stopped in the center of the marble floor, his eyes darting to the front desk. This building had been his fortress. For 3 years, he had walked through this lobby like a god, ignoring the staff, checking his reflection in the brass elevator doors, secure in the knowledge that he was better than everyone else. Now, he was a fugitive in his own home. Mr. Henderson, the night concierge, stood behind the high mahogany desk. He didn't offer his usual warm smile. He didn't reach for the elevator button. He simply watched Julian with a look of profound disappointment, his hands folded neatly on the counter. Elevator, Henderson, Julian barked, marching toward the lifts. Now. "I cannot do that, Mr. Thorne," Henderson said, his voice steady but firm. "The elevators have been locked down. Access to the penthouse is restricted." Julian spun around, his face twisted in a snarl. "Restricted? By who? I live here. My suits are upstairs. My life is upstairs." "By the owner, sir," Henderson replied, glancing at a tablet screen. "Mrs. Sterling Thorne called 10 minutes ago. She was quite specific. You are not to be admitted under any circumstances. If you attempt to force entry, I am to call the authorities." "Call them!" Julian screamed, a vein bulging in his neck. "Call the police! Tell them a man is trying to enter his own damn apartment!" He didn't wait for Henderson to react. He lunged for the elevator call button, hammering it with his fist. The light didn't turn on. The digital display above the doors remained black, deactivated. She had thought of everything. She had stripped him of his status, his job, his lover. And now she was locking him out of his shelter. But she didn't know about the cash. Julian knew he had one card left to play, the safe in the master bedroom closet. Inside, there was $200,000 in untraceable bills and a stack of gold coins he had skimmed from the company accounts over the last 2 years. It was his escape fund. If he could just get to that safe, he could grab his passport, take the service exit, and be on a plane to the Cayman Islands before the banks opened in the morning. He turned his eyes to the door marked stairwell. "Don't do it, Mr. Thorne," Henderson warned, reaching for the phone. "It's 40 floors." "Watch me," Julian spat. He kicked the stairwell door open and began to run. The first 5 flights were easy, fueled by pure adrenaline and rage. He took the steps 2 at a time, his mind racing. He would sue her. He would ruin her reputation. He would tell the press she was mentally unstable. By the 10th floor, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a searing burn in his lungs. His Italian leather shoes, designed for boardrooms and galas, slipped on the concrete steps. By the 20th floor, his legs felt like lead. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes. He stripped off his tuxedo jacket and threw it over the railing, watching it flutter down into the darkness of the shaft. "She planned this," the voice in his head hissed. "She knew I'd come here. She wants me to suffer." By the 30th floor, he was crawling. His hands were blistered. He was gasping for air, making sounds that were more animal than human. But the fear of poverty, the fear of being an ordinary, broke nobody, pushed him forward. He couldn't go back to being poor. He couldn't go back to coupon clipping and budget sedans. He was Julian Thorne. He deserved the gold. Finally, the number 40 painted on the concrete wall loomed in front of him. Julian collapsed against the heavy steel-fired door. He fumbled in his pocket for the emergency physical key he kept on his keychain. His hands shook so violently, it took him 3 tries to insert it into the lock. He prayed she hadn't changed the cylinders yet. Click. The door groaned open. Julian stumbled into the service hallway of the penthouse. It was pitch black. The silence of the apartment was heavy, suffocating. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the living room, the lights of Manhattan twinkled. 1 billion little stars that didn't care about him. "I made it," he wheezed, limping through the kitchen. He knocked over a bar stool in the dark, but didn't stop. "I made it." He reached the master bedroom. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't want to alert anyone outside. He used the flashlight on his phone, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. He threw open the walk-in closet door, pushing past the rows of Victoria's designer gowns. Gowns he now realized were bought with her money, not his allowance. He fell to his knees before the wall safe, hidden behind a false panel. He punched in the code. Left 40, right 12, left 05, his birthday, the only numbers that mattered to him. The mechanism whirred. The green light blinked. Julian yanked the heavy door open, his heart pounding in his ears like a war drum. He reached inside, his fingers ready to grab the stacks of $100 bills. His hand closed around empty air. He froze. He moved the flashlight beam into the safe. It was empty. The cash was gone. The gold Krugerrands were gone. His passport was gone. There was only one thing sitting on the velvet shelf. A single playing card. The King of Hearts. Julian picked it up with trembling fingers. Across the face of the king, written in elegant black ink, was one word. Checkmate. No, Julian whispered, the sound escaping his lips like a dying breath. No, it can't be. He began to frantically claw at the back of the safe, as if the money had dissolved into the metal. Where is it? Where is my money? It was never your money, Julian. The voice came from the darkness of the bedroom behind him. Deep, resonant, terrifying. Julian spun around, dropping the card. Who's there? The overhead lights blinded him as they suddenly flooded the room. Julian shielded his eyes, shrinking back against the closet door. Sitting in the wingback armchair in the corner of the room was Silas. The massive head of security looked completely at ease, his legs crossed, dusting a piece of lint from his trousers. Flanking him were two uniformed NYPD officers, their hands resting on their holsters. On the table next to Silas sat a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside, Julian saw the stacks of cash, the gold coins, and his passport. "You stole it!" Julian shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Silas. "That's my property! Officers, arrest him! He robbed my safe!" Silas stood up slowly, unfolding his massive frame until he towered over the room. He picked up the evidence bag. "Actually, Mr. Thorne," Silas said, his voice calm and cold, "we just recovered stolen corporate assets. The $200,000 in this bag. The serial numbers match the withdrawal from the Thorne Logistics Petty Cash Fund 3 months ago. The gold, purchased with a corporate wire transfer you authorized to a shell company in your name. We have the bank records. We have the IP addresses." The officer on the left stepped forward, unhooking a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Julian Thorne, you are under arrest." "Arrest?" Julian backed away, pressing himself into the rows of suits. "For what? This is a domestic dispute. Grand larceny, securities fraud, corporate embezzlement, and wire fraud," the officer listed, his tone bored, as if reading a grocery list. "And now, breaking and entering. Mrs. Sterling filed for an emergency eviction an hour ago. You broke into a property you no longer have legal access to." "I didn't know," Julian stammered, tears streaming down his face. The reality was crashing down on him. The walls were closing in. "I need a lawyer. I need my wife. Call Victoria. She won't let you do this. She loves me." Silas walked forward until he was inches from Julian's face. He smelled of expensive cologne and danger. "She doesn't love you, Julian," Silas said quietly. "She pities you. She told me that if you were foolish enough to come here tonight, if you were predictable enough to try and run, I was to give you a message." Julian looked up, his eyes red and pleading. "What? What did she say?" Silas leaned down, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a tomb closing. She said, "I hope Sophia was worth it, because she was the most expensive purchase you ever made." The officers grabbed Julian's arms. He didn't fight. All the fight had left him on the stairwell. As the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Julian Thorne realized the truth. He hadn't been playing a game. He had been walking into a trap for 5 years. 6 months later, the sunlight over the French Riviera was different than the light in New York. It was softer, golden, forgiving. Victoria sat on the terrace of the Hotel du Capitaine Rock, the azure Mediterranean, stretching out before her like a sheet of silk. The air smelled of salt and wild jasmine. She took a sip of her iced tea, listening to the gentle clinking of silverware and the distant murmur of conversation. She looked different. The tension that had lived in her shoulders for years, the permanent furrow in her brow from worrying about Julian's moods and Julian's debts. It was all gone. She wore a simple white linen sundress and oversized sunglasses. She looked like a woman who owned her own time. "Madame?" A waiter appeared at her side, holding a silver tray with a thick brown envelope. "Your mail, from New York." "Thank you, Henry," she said, taking the envelope. She knew what was inside. She slid her finger under the flap and pulled out the documents. Final decree of divorce. Sterling versus Thorne. Clipped to the front was a newspaper article from the New York Times, sent by her legal team. The headline was bold and black. "Fallen tycoon Julian Thorne, sentenced to 8 years." Victoria scanned the text. It was a brutal read. The trial had been swift. Julian had tried to blame everyone, his accountants, his secretary, even Sophia. But the evidence Victoria had compiled was bulletproof. The jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours. Sophia had testified against him in exchange for immunity, detailing every lavish trip and every piece of jewelry bought with stolen funds. Julian was now inmate number 189,402 at a correctional facility in upstate New York. He was bankrupt. His name was Mud. He had nothing. Victoria placed the paper down on the empty chair next to her. She waited for a wave of sadness, or perhaps a spike of triumph, but she felt neither. She just felt light. The anchor was gone. "Bad news?" Victoria looked up. Harrison Wells stood there, dressed in casual resort wear, holding a sketchbook. He had flown out to discuss the Foundation's European expansion, but in truth, he had been spending a lot of time just sitting with her, helping her learn to trust again. "No," Victoria said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "Ancient history." Harrison sat down, glancing at the newspaper clipping. He didn't comment on it. Instead, he pointed to the canvas set up on her easel. "The blue is vivid today." "It's cerulean," Victoria said, picking up her brush. "It means heavenly." "Are you going to host the Diamond Gala next year?" Harrison asked gently. "The board is asking. They understand if you want to step back. If you want to stay here in the quiet." Victoria looked out at the horizon, where the sea met the sky. She thought about the woman she used to be, the woman in the grey cardigan, hiding her light so her husband wouldn't feel overshadowed, the woman who made herself small so a small man could feel big. She dipped her brush into the paint, the blue swirling like the ocean. "Tell the board I'm hosting," Victoria said firmly, "and tell them to double the ticket price." Harrison laughed, a warm sound. "That's aggressive." "I'm a sterling, Harrison," she said, applying a bold, sweeping stroke to the canvas. "We don't do subtle, and I'm done hiding." She looked at her painting. It was messy, vibrant, and real, just like her life. The past was a lesson she had paid for in diamonds and tears, but the future was hers to paint, and that, my friends, is why you never bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand is wearing a diamond ring. Julian thought he was the main character, but he forgot that every king needs a queen, and in chess, the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. He lost his wife, his freedom, and his fortune because he mistook kindness for weakness. What do you think? Did Julian deserve 8 years in prison, or was losing Victoria punishment enough? And what about Sophia? Did she get off too easy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. We have a crazy tale coming up next week about a lottery winner who hid his ticket in a place nobody would ever look, until his mother-in-law cleaned the house. You don't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.